Yeah, the idea with the streaming thing is like we want to eventually have it so that when people come for meetups, all the meetups are live streamed and recorded if the meetup wants it. And we'll get like a webcam so you can see the speaker's face, the whole shooting match. All right, so let's take a look at our one list that we did to refresh our minds about what it is we have, and then we'll talk about that code that was not so great code. Oh, and let me do the live share if you care. Starting, there we go. And here. Okay, so here's our one list, and we could add things. Let's wait for the API to wake up. It's on Heroku. It'll take a second, but we should be able to.
I have one question.
Maybe not. Yes.
For this, we set the value to the state. Or shit, maybe yours is different. No, I think it's a new item text. And the input, we set the value to the new item text.
Yes.
Am I mistaken?
Where's our input? 2. Yep.
So I was doing an input last night, but that was blocking the text from staying in the input box.
Yeah, you probably didn't have an on change that was updating that state.
I had an on change.
And was it setting whatever that state variable is to the value of that input box?
I eventually got to that.
Yeah.
But
That would be it would block you from having the input update.
it wasn't staying inside the input box. It was like only console logging it.
We'll take a look at it later.
Okay.
Because it's impossible for me to know what it's doing without looking at your code.
Okay, sounds good.
Is this in a broken state when we left it? It shouldn't have been. Let's see what's going on. So when we load items, they're coming from the API. Let's see, if we put this in our browser, the URL, do we get data back? We do. And it's populating. And we said that, when we right click, we edit it. Getting better, exclamation mark. That works. But our new text isn't working. So on submit, aha. So I think what we're missing in here is an else. I think we put this if state editing around here to do a put. But what we need is an else. So so this was if we were editing. Otherwise, we need the same code, except it's a post. Yeah, I think the only thing we ever, when we refactored to having this right-click edit, we never hooked up the normal new item. And then it's not the ID, it's just post to items. We did leave it in a broken state. Fix the code. There we go. Okay. Right, so our one list is working again. But what we talked about was if we didn't reload all the items, what we used to do is we used to try to manipulate this array directly. So a few of you found like, hey, in one list when we're trying to append, maybe what you did was rather than call reload items, you said this.state.todos push response data, right? Because the response data that comes back from the API is the one new item, right? And we did this, and we did kind of the same thing here, right? But this doesn't really work. And we talked about the fact that we can't modify the to-dos on the state directly, right? We're not supposed to directly manipulate state. The only way we should be manipulating state is with this .setState. So we talked about, well, maybe let's make a new to-dos and assign that this.state.todos. Right? And then maybe we'll push new to-dos. We'll push the response data onto new to-dos, and then we'll do this.setState, and we'll make the to-dos the new to-dos. Right? We'll make a copy of the to-dos, and we'll push onto that copy, and then replace the state with those new to-dos. Right? Right? And now we're not reloading the entire list, we're just appending to the end. Right? We're not doing another API request to go bring them all in. But we said that even this is bad. And the reason why is this doesn't actually make a copy. This does not make a copy of this to-do arrays into a different variable new to-dos. If we were to put this back in that JavaScript visualizer, both of the arrows coming from that variable would be pointing to the same list. Right? This does not make a copy. New to-dos is an alias, a reference, a pointer to the same list of to-dos. Right? It's just giving us a new name to call it rather than this .state.todos. So we're still modifying the same state. So this is still kind of bad practice. So what we have is another library called immutability helpers. So immutability helper is a library we use when we're doing this kind of work, right? And immutability helper says it mutates a copy of data without changing the original source. Right? So we want to be able to take the to-dos and get a copy of that array, but with some change applied to it. Right? We want that original array, we want an entire copy of it, but something done to it. And what we want now is we want something pushed to the end of that array. Right? When we do the edit, we want that element replaced. Right? But in this case, we want something pushed to the end. And what immutability helper lets us do is exactly that. So let's add immutability helper to our app. Let's yarn add immutability helper. And while that's going on, let's look at the way immutability helper works. And it's a little bit weird. Right? This is going to be a little bit of a strange syntax, but let's take a look at it. Let's look at this very simple example where we're going to bring in this update function from immutability helper. We're going to have the variable or the function update, and that's what we're going to import from immutability helper. That's the function we're going to use to change arrays. So if we look at this example, we have state 1 being the array that holds the string x. Then we ask the update function, hey update, I want you to update the very first argument, in this case state 1, make a copy of it, but then please do what I want you to do, which I'm giving to you as the second argument. So the first argument to update is, which thing am I updating? And the second argument is, what transformations are going to happen to it? What actions are going to happen to it? And we provide that as an object. So you see the object right here, this here. We give it an object of changes to do. And then they use this funny $push. Right? The $sign here is just part of a legal name of a variable. You can have variables that start with the $sign. You can even have variables that are just a $sign. jQuery does that. right? The jQuery function gets represented just as a $sign. But here the $sign is kind of just a visual hint that this is part of update. And what we're saying is, in this object, one of the things I want you to do is push this array on the end. I want you to push whatever array here is onto the end of state 1, but give it back to me as a new variable called state 2. So state 1 is unaffected by this change. State 1 is still just an array that has x, and now we have a new array that has both x and y. All right. Kenny, question?
Yeah, what if you wanted to push multiple arrays?
Well, you wouldn't be pushing multiple arrays, you'd be pushing multiple values,
Okay.
right? Because this is an array of strings, and here we're pushing a new string. But if we put A, comma, B, comma, C as strings, our array would have X and A and B and C. Right. Let's mess around with it a little bit. Let's mess around with it a little bit in console and see what happens. We can do that if we bring up console. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't think I'll have update here. I don't. Let's mess around with it in Node. npm install immutability. We're going to mess around with it in console so we can see how it works. Question, Shay?
I'm a little confused by the $push. So push matters, right? But the $sign doesn't?
The $sign does. The $sign is the name. $push is the key that tells update that we're pushing something onto the end of the array. They could have just chosen the word push as their key, but they threw a $sign on it to like grab your eye.
Okay.
So the name of that key is $push.
Okay.
Right. It's the first time we've seen kind of this weird thing where we've seen that as a variable name. So I should have update now as a variable. Yeah. So let's try their example. Now in my console I have this, right? So let's make state 1 be an array that has x. And then let's copy this line and break it down. So we're making a new variable. It's going to be the result of updating state 1 by doing this. Let's put some spaces in here, right? And I said they could have just named this, right? It's Taco Tuesday. It's whatever they want to call it. They just put a $sign in front because the $sign grabs your eye. You can make your own variables. That is a perfectly legal variable name. $sign name. We don't do it very often because it's a little bit weird syntax to start a variable name with a $sign. But you'll see like things like jQuery. We'll do this for finding a DOM element, right? So if you've ever done jQuery stuff, the $sign is a perfectly valid. Let's make this a function that takes in a name and does console.log hello name. Oops, I was thinking Ruby. This should be a, should not be a, should be a $sign there, right? But it should output something, right? This should say hello Gavin, but I did a typo, right? So $sign is nothing special. It's just part of the name of the key. So we're asking immutability helpers, please update this variable. This is an array. And what I want you to do is push this on the end. So state 1 is still the same, but state 2 has x and y. If we said, let's update state 1 and let's push y and a and b on the end, State 3 now has all of those on the end. But state 1 is still the same. So mutability helpers let us manipulate objects and arrays by making a brand new copy of it and changing that as we're making the copy. So as we're making the copy of state 1, we're also pushing something on the end. Beautiful, right? Because that's exactly what we want to have happen here. So rather than just make what we thought was making a copy here, let's import the update. Import update from immutability helper. And then when we make these new to-dos, we'll just say let's update new to-do this.state.new-to-dos by pushing an array that has response.data in it. All right. Now we don't do this push. Let's write this out a bit. Make a new variable, new to-dos, that is a copy of our current state to-dos, but let's push the API result of the new to-do onto the end while we are making the copy. Right? And we put it in an array because it wants an array. If the response data was an array, we wouldn't have to put this array here. Right? But response data, if we look at the response of the OneList API, it returns us an object that is the thing that would go into the array. Right? It returns us one to-do as an object. That's the thing we want to append. And the format for immutability helpers is the push should take an array of things to push. If response data gave us back an array, we wouldn't have to put this array syntax here. And then we just set the state to those new to-dos. This is the right way of dynamically appending to an array in React. I saw both those hands go up at the same time. Let's start with John.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm stretching.
Oh, were you stretching?
So if we did just assign to-dos, okay, if we started a variable new to-dos equals to-dos.
This.state.to-dos.
Yeah, and then we push onto new to-dos.
Mm-hmm.
Is that gonna, I mean, that's essentially doing the same thing, but
it's not guaranteed to be immutable, and that state might change. Something else might also be going on in the interface that's also changing the state, and you're not guaranteed to have that immutability. So the state variable self should not be touched directly by you, the programmer.
okay.
So the only way you're allowed to modify the state is with setState in this style. If you directly modify this dot state dot something, if you directly reach in and manipulate it.
Yeah, new to-dos is in the state. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So if you directly manipulate state, what will happen is your program will work like 98% of the time, and then users are like, hey, sometimes when I use your form, my data isn't saved. Sometimes when I click on something, my Minesweeper is not working. Because what will happen is React is controlling the state. React owns that state, this .state variable, right? And React should be free to do with it as it pleases, unless you're doing this .setState. That's the only place React is expecting you to modify state. So if you do it from outside of there, bad things can happen to you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was getting confused with
No.
new to-dos being part of the state.
Yeah, we're going to refactor this a little bit in just a second.
So are we wanting to set the state for new to-dos?
No, not new to-dos. New to-dos is our new variable.
Are we trying to still set the state of to-dos to new to-dos?
Yes, and that's what we do right here. This is perfectly legal because new to-dos is a new copy of all the to-dos with one thing.
Okay.
So the way, right, let's apply our rule that says if we make a variable and we just use it in one place, let's delete this. and let's put it right here. Let's grab this from here, and let's replace it here. Right? This is how we would do it if we were just doing immutability. Let's set the state of to-dos to be the update of the to-dos with this response data pushed to the end of it. That's how you would read that. And we don't need that little variable. Yep.
I'm kind of curious, like, what's the difference?
So in the first case,
I know it makes a copy and then just adds to it.
Mm-hmm.
But before, like, we would just add to it.
It's right up. It's right down here. Here we are directly reaching into the heart of React. It's like doing open heart surgery on React, right? We're saying, hey React, I'm going to open up your chest cavity. I'm going to reach into those to-dos and manipulate them, right? And React is going to slap our wrist. No, don't do that. It doesn't give us any errors, doesn't any red warnings, but what will happen is 1 time out of 100, this will fail.
Okay.
1 time out of 100, your program is going to act weird. And you're going to be like, I don't know, it's in production and my boss is yelling at me because sometimes people are making deposits to their bank account, but it's not showing up. I don't know why. Because you did the wrong thing. You reached into this .state .something and changed it. Right? You did this .state.counter ++. This .state .todos .push. Once you do this .state, you should only be reading. This .state's only for reading.
Isn't there a way to go into the API and basically avoid this entire like secondary state? I thought there was a way that we could update an item with like a certain call using the ID of the given item. So basically,
what we're doing here is we're appending a new item onto the end of the to-dos.
Okay, I'm
so
sorry.
we started today. No, we started today with adding when we added a new item, we reloaded all the items, right? When we started this, what we had here was this .reload items, right? That's what we had. When we add a new item to the end of the array via the API gave us back that one new element that we should add to the end of our list, but we ignored it. And we said, fine, whatever. Yeah, you gave us back this new element to put on the end of the list. We tossed that data out the window and we said, yeah, whatever. Give me the entire list again, please, and I will use that to replace my state. That works, and we said that for small lists, that's perfectly fine. The user will never notice this slow approach, right, of just throwing away our old copy of the list and pulling down a brand new copy of the list. But what if that list was 1 billion items long, right? It's pretty wasteful. All we want to do is take that one new item that came back from the API and just tack it onto the end of the list. Right? We just want to tack it onto the end. So rather than reload all the items, we want to push that new element onto the end of the list. And the only way we knew up until 5 minutes ago was making a copy of to-dos, this .state.todos, and pushing that new to-do onto the end of the array and giving it back to the state. Right? Except when we first started this, I said, hey, by the way, going in and manipulating the state directly is bad practice. And you're all like, oh, we don't want to do bad practice. I said, except the way to show it to you not doing the bad practice is a little mind bending, and that's using something like immutability helpers. Right? So if you just want to, if you have some state that is an object or an array, and you want to modify it in your state, this is how you should be doing it. This is how you say, hey, to this.state.todos, which I'm reading only, I'm not modifying this.state.todos. I want an updated copy of you with the response data pushed to the end of that array. That's a new variable. Then I can replace my to-dos with it. And I'm not asking the API for a whole new copy of the to-dos. Right? This is how I push onto the end of the to-dos. Question?
Can you only use the push method with the update method, or can you
No.
also pop on shift and shift?
Oh yeah. Yep. they have a whole bunch of other things you can do. So you can push, you can set, right? So if you have an object X that has an object Y that has an object Z, you can use the set to change that. Let's take a look at that, because I think I still have this loaded here. Let's make an object, let's call it data. It's gonna have an X that has a Y, that has a Z, that is a 100. Right? And let's say you wanna update that Z in the state. Right? Let's imagine your state looks like this. It's a pretty complex object, right? Your state has an X, that X has a Y, that Y has a Z, and we want to change that Z. What we would use is the $ set. So we would say we would say update. Let's do new data is update the data, right? And then we can pass it something that looks like this. Let's update the X, which has a Y, which has a Z, and let's change it to 42. Right? We're saying find the X in the data, but then find the Y in the data, then find the Z in the data, and what I want to do is I want to change that to be 42. In parentheses. Right? It changed the Z all the way nested down. So imagine if you had a very complex state and you were just toggling something, like a Boolean true false, right? You would do something like this: update my this.state.whatever, first level, dot second level, dot third level, set that element to 42. Immutability helpers take a little while to understand. Right? It's a little bit of a weird syntax, right? Because it's this like object thing going on here to use. But yes, you can set things, you can push, you can unshift, you can splice, you can toggle, you can merge, you can apply, you can add, and you can remove to objects and arrays. So pretty much everything you can do to objects and arrays, immutability helpers let you do, but you get a new copy of the object or the array back with those changes made.
Why couldn't you use set state in that example with the nested XYZ?
You could, but this immutability helper is a separate library from React,
Okay.
and we just use it a lot. So if you find yourself needing to make a copy of an object with something changed, this will do that for you.
Okay.
But yes, in this case, you could do XYZ 42.
Set state. Okay.
Yeah. Because set state will automatically merge those states together. It's essentially what set state is doing, yes. Right. Immutability helpers is outside of React, but it's often used because it lends itself towards this kind of thing. Yeah.
Would you mind posting the links for that so I can look it up?
Yeah. It's so anytime that I mention a library, npm.js, this is where you can look up libraries. npm.js. So this is kind of the official repository of all of the npm libraries that we use. Right? And you could come in here and search for immutability helper. Right? Oh, there's immutability helper.
Show up on here when I pinned it.
Immutability helper.
It's for all of us. Should be there now.
Immutability helper. Cool. Right. So we would essentially use the same thing here in our else. Right. So this is update. Right. Now, whether or not we're editing one inline or we're pushing one, except this is editing inline. This one we have to not use push. This is the one where we want to change it, right? The ID being edited. So let's see if we can figure that out. I just closed it. So in this part of the code where we're doing the put and we're editing something, we don't want to push, we want to change one, we want to set one. Yeah. So let's come back here and look in immutability.js. Right. And we want to set one. So in our list of ones, right, we want to set. Oops. Let's see if we can find an example. Except I don't think we want.
Oh, you please.
I don't know if we want. For each item in an array called splice, add, supply. Do we want set? Let's see if we want set. Let's mess around in here and see if we want set. Let's make scores an array of 1, 42, and 100, 3. And we want to, what happens if we update scores? And I don't think we want set. Because we don't have an object, we have an index. Except what if we set this to 1,000,000? One too many. Yeah, okay, that does work.
So
Right.
it takes the second object or second
Element
index.
and sets it to that. Yeah. So here, when we get this one back, what we want is we want to take this .state.id being edited, except that's the ID being edited. We need the index of the thing being edited, don't we? Right, it's not just the ID, it is the index of the thing being edited. So we need another bit of state now to track. So in addition to the ID being edited, we also now need index being edited. So we also need to now find the index. So let's also find the index. So we need the ID being edited and the index being edited, because eventually here, this one, when we're updating, will become this.state index being edited. Let's make this bigger. And we are going to set this to the response data and finally close this. And then let's move this comment down here because it's not appropriate there. Let's make a new comment here because this is kind of weird. Use update to go to the index specified in this.state.index being edited and set its value to the response of the API. You'll do stuff like this. Let's see if we made this work or not. Let's right click using immutability. Yay. It worked. All right. So 2 different uses of immutability. One where we are saying, go find this index and set its data. The other where we're saying, take this list of to-dos and push a new one on the end. Right. This is how you would use more complex state and modify things like arrays and objects. This is why we typically want our state to be kind of simple, because when you get into more complex states where you're modifying portions of it, you end up with needing to use these kinds of things. It's unavoidable in larger projects. Right? This is often why when we create APIs for you to use, we try and create them as relatively straightforward things, like Minesweeper, where you get the entire state back every time, right? And we don't sort of introduce this kind of more complex logic to you until later. So this is doing that. Let's talk. We went until 10:11. You know what? I was also going to talk about async await and multiple APIs. Let's flip and do that at 2 or at 3, whichever way you're going to do review at 2 or with me at 3. Let's talk about that later because I want to cover questions you all have on photo gallery. So why don't we take a break and then we'll bring Michelle back and let her know that we're going to talk about photo gallery. And let's get back together at 10:20.